what if the greatest mind in human history left behind more than just blueprints and patents? What if he left behind something still running, still waiting in the darkness of an abandoned laboratory? In a climate-controlled storage room beneath a university research facility in Colorado, a machine that had not been touched since 1943 was carefully removed from a wooden crate. The researchers who opened that crate were expecting to find a curiosity, a relic, a conversation piece for a science museum. What they found instead was a fully intact, functional device built by the most controversial genius in the history of modern electricity. And when they finally turned it on, the readings they recorded should not have been possible, not according to anything we currently understand about physics. Hi, my name is Matthew, and this is Reef Discovery, the machine that history forgot. In 1943, Nikola Tesla died alone in room 3327 of the New Yorker Hotel in Manhattan. He was 86 years old, largely broke, and had not published significant scientific work in years. Within hours of his death, agents from the Office of Alien Property swooped into his hotel room and confiscated everything. His notebooks, his correspondence, his personal effects, and several pieces of equipment that no one has ever fully cataloged or explained. Most of those materials were eventually transferred to what is now the Tesla Museum in Belgrade. Some were returned to Tesla's nephew, but a significant portion, the portion that has always made historians uncomfortable, simply disappeared into the machinery of wartime government secrecy. For decades, researchers filed requests, scientists asked questions, and the answers they received were either vague, incomplete, or flatly denied. Then, in 2012, a researcher named Dr. James Folger, working through the University of Colorado's Department of Electrical Engineering, was cross-referencing a collection of equipment donations made to the university in the 1950s. Most of it was standard lab surplus, oscilloscopes, signal generators, outdated transformers gathering dust on metal shelves, standard stuff, nothing remarkable. Folger was not even sure why he had been asked to look at it. And then he opened a particular crate in the back of a basement storage room that had a handwritten label on the outside that simply read, Tesla T 1943. Inside, packed in deteriorating foam and wrapped in oilcloth, was a device approximately the size of a large suitcase. Copper coils wound with a precision that modern machinists described when they later examined it as almost unsettling. Ceramic insulators of a type that was not commercially available in the 1940s. Wiring configurations that did not match any standard electrical schematic from that, and a handwritten set of operating instructions in Tesla's own handwriting. Folger later said in an interview that his first reaction was not excitement. It was unease. He described the feeling of looking at something that was clearly not supposed to still exist, like finding a sealed room in a house that everyone insisted had no sealed rooms. The device sat in that facility for another 3 years while Folger assembled a team, secured funding, and navigated the considerable institutional resistance that comes with announcing you have found something that may challenge established scientific models. And honestly, I cannot blame the university for being cautious, because once you understand what this machine was designed to do, cautious starts to seem like the bare minimum. Who was Tesla, really? Let me ask you something. When you picture Nikola Tesla, what do you see? If you are like most people, you picture the dramatic black and white photographs, the tall, severe-looking man surrounded by artificial lightning, the eccentric genius in the darkened laboratory. Maybe you think of the alternating current motor, or the quote about the future belonging to those who prepare for it today, which by the way he almost certainly never said, but that is a whole separate video. The popular image of Tesla has become so dominated by mythology that the actual man has nearly disappeared behind it. And that disappearance is convenient for a lot of people because the real Tesla, the one who shows up in the technical literature and the private correspondence and the later patent applications, was doing work that was considerably more radical than building impressive lightning demonstrations for wealthy guests. Tesla was born in 1856 in what is now Serbia. He had a photographic memory, the ability to perform complex calculations mentally, and an almost pathological commitment to his own theoretical frameworks, even when they conflicted with the emerging consensus around him. He came to America in 1884 and went to work briefly for Thomas Edison, an experience that ended badly, and which Tesla spent the rest of his life being diplomatically furious about. His early career gave us the alternating current system that powers virtually every home and building on Earth. That is not a small achievement. That is one of the most consequential engineering contributions in human history. But Tesla was not interested in stopping there. By the 1900s, Tesla had become focused on something that his contemporaries found either visionary or delusional, depending on who you ask. He was convinced that energy could be transmitted wirelessly through the Earth itself, not through the air like radio waves, through the ground, through the planet. He believed that the Earth had natural resonant frequencies, specific vibrations that could be used to transmit power over unlimited distances without any wires at all. His famous Wardenclyffe Tower project, the enormous transmission tower he built on Long Island and then watched get demolished after J.P. Morgan pulled his funding, was the most visible expression of this obsession, but it was not the only one, because while the public was watching watching the drama of Wardenclyffe, Tesla was quietly developing something in his private laboratory that he considered far more important. A device he referred to in his private notes simply as the resonance amplifier. He never published a complete description of it. He never filed a standard patent for it. And the handful of researchers who caught references to it in his later writings generally assumed it was either theoretical speculation or the product of a mind that had begun to lose its grip on practical reality. They were wrong on both counts. What the machine was designed to do to understand what Tesla's resonance amplifier was intended to do, you need to understand one concept that most people have heard of, but few have properly grasped: resonance. Here is the simplest way to explain it. Every physical system, whether it is a wine glass, a bridge, a building, or a planet, has a natural frequency at which it most easily vibrates. If you apply energy at exactly that frequency, something remarkable happens. The system begins to absorb that energy with extraordinary efficiency. Small inputs produce large effects. This is why a trained opera singer can shatter a wine glass without touching it. The sound waves hit the glass at its resonant frequency, and the glass amplifies those vibrations until it can no longer hold itself together. Tesla was convinced that this principle applied not just to physical objects, but to the electromagnetic structure of the Earth itself. He believed the space between the Earth's surface and the ionosphere, the upper layer of the atmosphere, functioned as a resonant cavity, a natural electromagnetic amplifier. If you could find the right frequency and introduce energy at that frequency, you would not need enormous power inputs. The system would do the amplification for you. His resonance amplifier was designed to do exactly that, to find the Earth's natural electromagnetic frequency, match it precisely, and use it to transmit energy wirelessly to any point on the planet. The theory was elegant. The implications were staggering. If it worked, the entire infrastructure of power transmission, the cables, the towers, the substations, the grid itself, became unnecessary. Energy generated anywhere could be received anywhere, not cheaply, freely. Now, I know what some of you are thinking, because I thought the same thing when I first went deep on this. You were thinking this sounds like every other free energy conspiracy theory you have ever heard. And I want to be honest with you, that instinct is reasonable. This territory is absolutely crawling with cranks and grifters and people who want to sell you something. But here is the thing that kept pulling me back. In 1952, 9 years after Tesla's death, physicist W.O. Schumann published a paper describing exactly what Tesla had theorized: natural electromagnetic resonances in the cavity between the Earth's surface and the ionosphere, frequencies that are now called Schumann resonances. The primary Schumann resonance is approximately 7.83 Hertz. It is real. It is measurable. It is used today in geophysical research and atmospheric science. Tesla had calculated a figure remarkably close to this in the 1890s without modern instruments, without the mathematical frameworks that Schumann used. Through a combination of theoretical reasoning and experimental observation that the scientific establishment of his time dismissed as eccentricity. So, when Dr. Folger's team opened that crate in Colorado and began examining the device inside, they were not looking at the fantasies of a madman. They were looking at a machine designed around a principle that modern science had independently confirmed, built by a man who had been right before when everyone told him he was wrong. The operating instructions in Tesla's handwriting described a specific startup sequence, a series of frequency adjustments that had to be made in a precise order. The notes referenced resonance matching as the critical threshold, the point at which Tesla wrote, "The machine stops drawing and starts receiving. Stops drawing and starts receiving." Music, sit with that for a moment. The decision to reactivate it. The 3 years between Folger's discovery and the actual reactivation were not idle years. They were 3 years of argument. The team that eventually assembled around this project included electrical engineers, physicists, a material scientist who specialized in early 20th century manufacturing techniques, and one historian of science brought in specifically because she had spent 15 years studying Tesla's unpublished correspondence. Her name was Dr. Sarah Chin. She later described her role on the team as the person everyone ignored until they stopped being able to ignore her. The arguments were not primarily scientific. They were institutional. In mainstream academic circles, serious engagement with Tesla's post-Wardenclyffe research is considered professionally risky. Not because the physics is necessarily wrong, but because the subject has been so thoroughly colonized by conspiracy theorists and pseudoscience enthusiasts that legitimate researchers avoid it the way you avoid the one coworker who always wants to talk about their dreams. The University of Colorado had to weigh what it meant reputationally to publicly associate itself with a project that even whispered in Tesla's later work. And I say that as someone who is literally making a video about Tesla's secret machine. I am aware of the irony. Moving on. What eventually broke the deadlock was the materials analysis. When the team's specialist examined the device's components, what she found could not be explained as standard 1940s manufacturing. The operating instructions in Tesla's handwriting described a specific startup sequence, a series of frequency adjustments that had to be made in a precise precise order. The notes referenced resonance matching as the critical threshold, the point at which Tesla wrote, "The machine stops drawing and starts receiving. Stops drawing and starts receiving." Music, sit with that for a moment. The decision to reactivate it. The 3 years between Folder's discovery and the actual reactivation were not idle years. They were 3 years of argument. The team that eventually assembled around this project included electrical engineers, physicists, a material scientist who specialized in early 20th century manufacturing techniques, and one historian of science brought in specifically because she had spent 15 years studying Tesla's unpublished correspondence. Her name was Dr. Sarah Chin. She later described her role on the team as the person everyone ignored until they stopped being able to ignore her. The arguments were not primarily scientific. They were institutional. In mainstream academic circles, serious engagement with Tesla's post-Wardenclyffe research is considered professionally risky. Not because the physics is necessarily wrong, but because the subject has been so thoroughly colonized by conspiracy theorists and pseudoscience enthusiasts that legitimate researchers avoid it the way you avoid the one coworker who always wants to talk about their dreams. The University of Colorado had to weigh what it meant reputationally to publicly associate itself with a project that even whispered in Tesla's later work. And I say that as someone who is literally making a video about Tesla's secret machine. I am aware of the irony. Moving on. What eventually broke the deadlock was the materials analysis. When the team's specialist examined the device's components, what she found could not be explained as standard 1940s manufacturing. On a Tuesday morning in October of 2015, in a shielded laboratory room in Colorado, Dr. James Folger read Tesla's handwritten startup instructions aloud while his team made each adjustment in sequence. The room was quiet in the way rooms only get when everyone in them understands that something is about to either confirm or destroy months of work. And they turned it on. The moment they turned it on, the first thing that happened was nothing. This is actually important. When you apply power to most electrical devices, something happens immediately. Current flows, components heat up, displays activate, motors turn. The device does what devices do. For approximately 40 seconds after initial power was applied to Tesla's machine, absolutely nothing happened. The monitoring equipment confirmed power was going in. The device's own indicators, small incandescent bulbs in a style consistent with 1940s construction, stayed completely dark. 40 seconds is not a long time, unless you are standing in a silent laboratory watching a machine that should not exist, waiting to find out if the last 3 years of your professional life were worth anything. In that context, 40 seconds is an eternity. Then, at the 42-second mark, according to the team's log data, something happened that none of them had anticipated. The power draw dropped, not to zero. It dropped below the baseline. The monitoring equipment showed the device consuming less energy than the passive resistance of its own wiring should have allowed, which is, to be straightforward about it, not something that is supposed to happen. That is not an inefficiency. That is not a calibration issue. That is a result that has no comfortable home in standard electrical theory. One of the junior researchers later described this moment in a personal account that circulated privately, but was never officially published. He wrote that the room went very quiet, not because anyone had asked for quiet, but because everyone had stopped breathing at the same time. The incandescent indicators came on slowly, not with the sudden illumination of a switch being thrown, but with a gradual brightening that took nearly 30 seconds to reach full intensity, as if the machine were waking up rather than being switched on, as if it were remembering something. And the frequency analyzers, which had been continuously monitoring the electromagnetic environment in the room, began registering a signal in the 7 to 8 Hz range. 7 to 8 Hz. The primary Schumann resonance is 7.83 Hz. The machine was not generating that frequency. It was locking onto it, like a radio finding a station after someone slowly turns the dial to exactly the right position, like a tuning fork beginning to sing in sympathy with a note it was always built to recognize. The distinction matters enormously. Generating a frequency requires energy input. Locking onto an existing frequency means something else entirely. It means the device was doing precisely what Tesla's operating notes described. It was not producing, it was receiving. Folder's notes from that morning describe his reaction with a restraint that I find almost funny given what he was actually witnessing. He wrote, "Initial results suggest the device is functioning as designed. Further monitoring required." That is the scientific equivalent of watching a building spontaneously reassemble itself from rubble and writing in your notebook, "Structural behavior appears unusual. Recommend observation continues." The man deserves some kind of award for understatement. Over the following 6 hours, the team ran the device through each stage of the startup sequence Tesla had laid out in his handwritten instructions. At every stage, they recorded their readings. And at every stage, the readings became progressively harder to explain using any framework currently sitting in a physics textbook. The power anomaly did not resolve itself. Deepened. By the 3rd hour of operation, the device was consuming measurably less power than had been applied at startup. Not slightly less, measurably, documented documentably, check it 3 times because surely something is wrong less. The team checked the monitoring equipment twice, then a 3rd time. Then they checked it a 4th time and did not write that part down because at some point checking the equipment becomes a way of avoiding what the equipment is telling you. The numbers were real. And then in the 5th hour, the ground current detectors registered something that brought the entire session to a sudden stop. The results that stunned researchers. Before I describe what the ground current detectors recorded, I need to explain why ground currents matter in this context. The Earth is not electrically inert. There are natural electrical currents flowing through the ground at all times, driven by atmospheric electricity, by the movement of the magnetic field, by geothermal activity, and yes, by Schumann resonances. These currents are small, diffuse, and spread across enormous distances. They are the background electrical noise of the planet itself. What the ground current detectors in Folger's lab recorded in the 5th hour of operation was a coherent signal, not background noise, not random fluctuation, a structured repeating signal in the ground beneath the laboratory that matched the output frequency of the device above it. The Earth was responding, not dramatically, not in the way you might imagine if you have watched too many science fiction films. There were no sparks, no tremors, no dramatic visual effects. The signal was small, but it was structured, it was coherent, and according to every model of how ground currents work, it should not have been there. The team shut down the session and spent the next 4 days analyzing their data before they said anything to anyone outside the laboratory. During those 4 days, according to Dr. Chen's later account, the atmosphere in the team shifted from excitement to something closer to caution because they were beginning to understand the implications of what they had recorded. Let me lay out the specific anomalies the team documented because this is where the story stops being atmospheric and starts being concrete. First, the power consumption anomaly. Over 6 hours of operation, the device consumed an average of 38% less power than its own baseline resistance should have required. This is not a rounding error. This is not instrument drift. This is a result that has no conventional explanation within standard electrical engineering. The team's material scientist proposed that the ceramic compound in the insulators might be exhibiting a piezoelectric effect that was partially compensating for resistive losses. This hypothesis was tested, and it explained approximately 9% of the anomaly. The remaining 29% remained unexplained. Second, the frequency lock. The device achieved and maintained resonance with the primary Schumann frequency without active tuning after the initial startup sequence. Maintaining that lock should have required continuous adjustment as conditions in the electromagnetic environment changed. The device did it autonomously. Tesla's handwritten notes had described this as self-correcting resonance, a phrase the team had initially interpreted as aspirational rather than descriptive. It was descriptive. Third, the ground signal. The coherent signal recorded in the ground beneath the laboratory was measured by 3 independent detectors at different depths. It was consistent across all 3. Its frequency matched the device's output to within 0.01 Hz. Its amplitude was small but measurable, and it persisted for 11 minutes after the device was shut down. 11 minutes of coherent signal in the ground after the source had been switched off. That detail, more than any other, is the one that the team could not find a framework to explain. Fourth, and this is the one that Dr. Chen has been most cautious about describing publicly. During the 5th hour of operation, a portable radio receiver that had been left on a bench in the laboratory, not as part of the monitoring apparatus, just left there, powered itself on. It had been switched off. Its battery was confirmed depleted before the session began. It powered on, produced a brief burst of static at a frequency consistent with the device's output, and then went silent. The team logged it. They did not include it in their formal preliminary report. They were, understandably, not sure what to do with it. Now look, I want to be careful here because this is precisely where legitimate science tips over into the territory of extraordinary claims. A radio powering itself on during an electrical experiment could have mundane explanations. Residual charge in a supposedly depleted battery, electromagnetic induction from the monitoring equipment. I am not telling you this detail proves anything. I am telling you it happened, it was logged, and it has not been explained. What the team could say, and did say in their preliminary internal report, was this: the device operates in a manner consistent with Tesla's theoretical framework for ground wave energy transmission. Its behavior at the Schumann resonance frequency produces measurable effects in the surrounding electromagnetic that are not accounted for by existing models. The results require further investigation. Further investigation that, as of the time I am making this video, has not been publicly published in full. What this means, and why it was buried here, is the part of this story where I have to be careful because there is a version of this narrative that slides very quickly into territory I do not want to go. The version where shadowy forces suppress clean energy, where oil companies pull strings at universities, where government agents confiscate data in the night. That version is satisfying. It is also almost certainly too simple. What actually happens when research produces results that challenge existing models is both more mundane and in some ways more troubling than dramatic suppression. What happens is institutional inertia, peer review processes that are by design deeply conservative, funding structures that reward incremental confirmation of existing frameworks and penalize radical departure from them, career incentives that make researchers very cautious about being publicly associated with findings that will attract ridicule before they attract replication. Dr. Folger's team submitted a preliminary version of their findings to 2 journals in 2016. Both declined to review it. The reasons given were editorial in nature, not scientific. The subject matter fell outside the journal's scope. The findings were described as requiring more robust replication before peer review would be appropriate. These are not unreasonable editorial positions. They are also the standard mechanism by which genuinely anomalous results get quietly sidelined without anyone having to explicitly say they are suppressing anything. Nobody suppressed Tesla's machine. The institution simply declined to engage with it, and this connects to something much larger than one device in one laboratory in Colorado. Tesla spent the last 40 years of his life increasingly marginalized by an establishment that had adopted his early work as infrastructure while rejecting his later theoretical framework as fantasy. The alternating current system that powers your home is Tesla's. The radio, whose patent priority was only officially corrected in Tesla's favor in 1943, the year he died, that is Tesla's, the fluorescent light, the remote control, the foundational concepts behind radar. Tesla's. And yet, the man died alone and broke in a hotel room while the industry built on his early work continued without him. There is a pattern here that extends far beyond one eccentric inventor. It is the pattern of what happens when a framework-breaking idea runs into an establishment built on the framework it would break. Not conspiracy, not coordinated suppression, just the ordinary grinding resistance of systems that do not benefit from being disrupted. If Tesla's resonance amplifier works as the Colorado results suggest it might, the implications for energy infrastructure are not incremental. They are structural. You are not talking about a more efficient power plant. You are talking about a fundamental redesign of how energy is generated, distributed, and paid for. You are talking about rendering obsolete an infrastructure worth, by some estimates, tens of trillions of dollars globally. And you are talking about doing it with a technology whose foundational patent would belong to a dead man who cannot be monetized, controlled, or made to sign a licensing agreement. That is not a conspiracy, that is just economics. And it is considerably more frightening. So, where does this leave us? The Colorado team's data exists. It has been shared informally within certain research communities. A small number of physicists and electrical engineers who have reviewed it privately describe it as genuinely anomalous and worthy of serious investigation. None of them have said so publicly. Dr. Folger continues to work at the University of Colorado. He does not give interviews about this project anymore. Dr. Chan left academic research in 2018 and now works with an independent nonprofit focused on energy access in developing nations. She has never publicly contradicted the team's findings. The machine itself is still in Colorado in a different storage location than the one where it was found. It has not been reactivated since 2015. Tesla himself wrote in a letter to a colleague in 1937, 6 years before his death, and roughly 6 years before a device matching his resonance amplifier specifications was apparently shipped to a university in Colorado under circumstances no one has fully explained. The present is theirs. The future, for which I really worked, is music mine. He was right about alternating current when everyone told him he was wrong. He was right about radio. He was right about the Schumann resonance before Schumann was born. He was right about a staggering number of things that the establishment of his time refused to accept. The question is not whether Tesla was a genius. We settled that decades ago. The question is whether we are repeating the exact same mistake his contemporaries made, looking at results we cannot explain, and choosing not to look harder because the implications make us uncomfortable. The Colorado results are not proof. They are not a finished discovery. They are an anomaly, and anomalies are not answers. They are the beginning of questions. What this story should make you ask is not whether some shadowy cabal is hiding free energy from the world. It should make you ask something quieter and more unsettling. What else are we not looking at? What other crates are sitting in what other basements labeled in handwriting that no one alive can quite believe, waiting for someone who is not afraid of the question? The machine is real. The results are documented. The questions have not been answered. And that is exactly where the most important work begins. My name is Matthew. This is Reef Discovery. If this story made you think, share it with someone who is not afraid to think alongside you. And if you have heard something about this research that I have not covered here, I genuinely want to know about it. Leave it in the comments. I read every single one. I will see you in the next one.